The Kingdom of Cambodia receives more international aid money per head of population than almost any nation on earth. But while the evidence of development from that money can be seen in the capital Phnom Penh, you don't have to go too far to see that enormous challenges remain. And now there is a new problem. Critics say that the vast amount of money that has flooded this country has created a dependency culture and is now actually stifling further progress. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East we ask, is international aid harming Cambodia more than it's helping? Last year, around 600 aid organizations were granted almost $700 million to spend in Cambodia. Now, much of that budget went to building infrastructure like schools, but some of it went to much more controversial projects. Fazia Ibrahim reports now on the impact of aid spending in the country.
Cham Kha Bay, one of Cambodia's poorest villages. This former Khmer Rouge stronghold was once a progressive community, thanks to a 1998 UNESCO development project.
When
UNESCO first came, they built a school and they taught our community to sew, knit and weave. Then at the end of their mandate in 2004, they handed everything to us. But because our community did not have the managing experience and no leadership, we could not continue the activities.
Without proper infrastructure, the programs, like the machines and buildings, became dilapidated, leaving the residents disillusioned. Today, a smaller non-government organization is attempting to breathe life back into Cham Kha Bay.
The cooperation is the most important. The idea of thinking ahead for the sustainability of the project is the most important. The empowerment to the community, so something like this is the most important. And I don't think that UNESCO focusing on those, those concepts. They're just coming to run it by themselves. When they stop it, nobody can continue because UNESCO did not involve them at the beginning.
These are the sewing machines and hand looms left over by the UNESCO Vocational Aid Project. The Cham Kha Bay community say they weren't given enough training and support to continue the program, and that's why these machines have been left to rot. Many NGOs say this is typical of international aid agencies. They may have the bigger budgets, but they lack effective planning and consultation with the communities.
Cambodia does not suffer a lack of international aid, most of which goes to helping the majority rural poor. About half of the central government's budget depends on donor assistance, and there's an estimated 600 NGOs operating in the country. But for some, all this available help is counterproductive.
Aid is helping the people of Cambodia with regards to education, with regards to health. But it's also enabling a system that is corrupt, it's enabling a system that is mismanaged, and more than that, what's more invidious is creating a mentality of dependency where we are constantly begging.
Despite constantly being ranked among the most corrupt Asian countries, Cambodia continues to receive large-scale foreign aid. Some critics accuse the government of taking a portion of the financial help before channeling it to help those who need it most.
So that is a kind of blackmail on the part of the Cambodian government. They say that if the donor community wants to help the Cambodian people, the donor community has to go through the Cambodian government and to tolerate any practice. Otherwise, the poor will get nothing in this country.
I don't agree, not at all, with such a judgment. Always the grant aid go to the people to consider. Let's take one example. When China gave us the money for the building the bridge in the countryside, we use all the Chinese aid to build rural road and rural bridge for the people in the country.
Other critics say donors should be more vigilant when dispensing aid. In 1999, the Asian Development Bank, or the ADB, loaned the Cambodian government $40 million to build part of a national highway. The road links Phnom Penh to the Vietnam border, promoting economic trade between the two countries. But activists say the Cambodian government failed to compensate those who lost their homes and livelihoods to the highway.
We found that lack of monitoring from the ADB part. Most of the time, ADB trying to defend themselves by saying that, you know, those money they already released to your government. So it's not responsible anymore by the ADB, so your government need to respond that. So the ADB just only thinking about their loan.
International aid has long been plagued by the debate over technical assistance or foreign consultants hired by the agencies to oversee aid projects. Cambodia is not immune to the controversy over these experts, who often take up a large amount of the aid budget.
I used to work with one international agency. The technical assistant, you know, they pay like half of the project budget. So it's very huge. I don't think it's necessary, you know, for if they have like 3 people, it's necessary we have 1, you know, or 2 people is enough. I can see that many Cambodians, they can do the work, but sometimes they are not empowered, they are not respected.
But until Cambodians are respected, it appears the culture of dependency on foreign aid and the cycle of poverty will continue.
For today's conversation, we've come to the Sri Popay Buddhist temple and school in the middle of Phnom Penh. My guests for today's show are Arjun Goswami, who's the country director of the Asia Development Bank here in Cambodia. Terry Seng is the executive director of the Center for Social Development in Cambodia. And Dr. Chap Sotarit is the executive director of the Cambodia Institute for Cooperation and Peace. Thank you all for joining us here today. Chap Sotarit, let me begin with you today. The noise from the street outside is a fitting testament to the amount of development that has gone on in Cambodia over the past 15 years. Has it been good?
Yes, actually Cambodia, you know, is just transfer from a country in conflict. It's a post-war country in development. And then especially after 1998, the country have a full peace and political stability. We can see a lot of foreign direct investment, a lot of development is going on. The private sector is booming, especially in the 3 leading sectors, the government, tourism, and of course construction.
Well, Terry Seng, how has all of these elements combined in today's Cambodia? Has it been a productive 15 years?
The country has progressed since the Khmer Rouge years, since UNTAC came in '93. No one would argue against that. My concern is the effectiveness of international assistance, whether the billions have been fully used to its capacity and managed well. And I don't believe it has been managed as well as it could.
And there we have the nub of this conversation, essentially. People have been asking the question of Cambodia's aid mechanisms and the effect they're having for almost 10 years now. I mean, it came up very quickly because of the sheer amount of money that came into a country that was so very poor. Do you agree with the criticism that perhaps it could have been handled better?
All things can always be done better still. But I think if one looks at the progress over the last 10-15 years and the way the aid community has been working with the government, there's been an enormous investment of time and effort to try and harmonize aid efforts, to make them more effective, build in a lot of structures, and there is a very, very comprehensive structure. Some would say the most comprehensive.
Well, what exactly do you think are the negative aspects of what's been going on?
My concern is the dependency that it has created among the local population for foreign assistance, that there has been, that it is not sustainable. Of course, when you compare anything with black, it will be gray, it will be lighter. And we're using the standard, the Khmer Rouge years of the 80s, when there was nothing here.
But surely you can't have this conversation without comparing it to black, because black is exactly what it was. Describe to us how the situation of Cambodia was coming out of not only almost 5 years of Khmer Rouge rule, but a history of colonialism and a country that really wasn't, within the current context of the nation state, very united at all.
I think for the past 500 years of history, this is the first time that Cambodia have a national unity, you know, under the slogan, under the motto of nation, religion, the king.
When UNTAC came in 93, Cambodia really was utterly unable to fend for itself, is that right?
Yes, because you know the country with a big devastation, disasters of the war and the political isolation, it requires a big amount of fund for development. So the assistance cover about half of our budget. It is a big help to the development of the country. Without it, we cannot do that.
You can't ignore the fact that something had to be done, can you?
I'm not arguing that development hasn't occurred. It's chaotic development is what has happened. And I would disagree that there is unity. I think society is very divisive. I think there are many social ills that have come along with foreign assistance. For example, AIDS and HIV. We didn't have that before to a degree where we have the highest rate in the region. We have prostitution. We have the paradox of road where the country is connected, but then it facilitates land grabbing. Mandalkari, this beautiful part of the country, was isolated. The tribal ethnic minority groups could maintain their culture, and now their lands are being sold off and are being exploited, are being grabbed by the powerful.
I'll let you speak to some of those issues in just a moment. We'll have to take a short break and consider some of those specific accusations when we return. Do stay with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to 101 East, where this week we're considering the impact that foreign aid spending has had on Cambodia. Now, before the break, we looked at one project, a $40 million national highway that's made transport around the country much easier. But one unintended effect of that road has been the displacement of thousands of families. 58-year-old Sin Ching tells us now how foreign aid spending has impacted her life.
When I lived by the old national road, I earned a living selling coffee and food to the passing travelers. I was able to support my family and even have some left over to spend on myself. One day, some government officials came and told me about the construction of the national highway. They asked me to move my house back to make way for the road. My house used to be located at this point where I am standing now. But in 2000, the construction team made us move 25 meters back from the road. They told us our house was located on the road and the government would only give us money to remove my house. After that, I didn't have money to build a new house, so I borrowed from others to build a new home. After we moved and the highway was built, my shop lost business. I didn't have any plantation or rice field, so I can't earn enough money to support my family. My children stopped going to school so they could move to Phnom Penh to earn some money. In 2006, I joined an NGO to meet officials from the Asian Development Bank. I asked them for compensation and they promised to solve my problems. But I still have not heard from them.
And welcome back to the conversation about whether foreign aid into Cambodia has been productive or in equal measure destructive. I'm still joined by our guests today. Arjun Goswami is the country director of the Asian Development Bank, Terry Seng, executive director of the Center for Social Development, and Dr. Chap Sotarit, executive director of the Cambodia Institute for Cooperation and Peace. Now, before the break, we had some very specific accusations. Let me get your perspective on this. Has the benefits of aid also brought with it the kind of backward elements that Terry Seng was talking about before the break?
You know, I think there's no country in the world have a perfect, perfect in terms of aid utilization. There's a lot of misconduct. There's a lot of mismanagement. But for me, if you ask about the constraint, of the effectiveness of the aid, I would say that there maybe the assistance sometimes is we call concentration and fragmentation. Concentration means some assistance will focus more into particular area rather than other area which is underutilized, underfunded.
It seems to me there must be two elements to this, and as a long-term member of the aid community, you probably recognize the structures of that community better than most. There must be something endemic in the structures that the West has created for these agencies that gives rise to this to a certain extent.
You know, to me, the issue is what kinds of checks and balances are built into the system. If one makes the assumption that there will never be a problem in a structure, then I think one is living in a fool's paradise. That's simply not realistic. The issue is, our development partners is the aid community working with others to create that kind of check and balance system. And I think the answer to that is, yes, we've been working hard on that. And civil society and NGOs play a crucial role in this. This is the other part of the triangle.
What you seem to be saying is that you're happy with the extent of the mismanagement, of the corruption, of the stuff that's going on as a necessary corollary to what you're doing on the good side.
No, I wouldn't say that. But there's a development process that the country is going through. There are serious issues and challenges in the area of governance. The risks related to governance are real, and these are ones that we have to tackle systemically. It's not a question of preaching from the bully pulpit. I think that method doesn't yield good results. It is a question of building the systems within the government and building reforms and reform constituencies within the country that will sustain better governance for the country.
Arjun makes a good point in saying that you can't have systems like this where there isn't some leakage around the edges. How much are you prepared to accept on this? I mean, how much of this economic development would you be prepared to sacrifice in order to solve some of the problems that you're seeing?
I agree that it's the nature of the beast of the international aid community, because international donors aren't monolithic. They don't have a united front or a united voice. They're uncoordinated. They have different diverse national interests and different motivations, and they're managed by human beings who are flawed. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the interests of the Cambodian people are not at the core of the issue. It becomes the personal interests of that. And I'm positive because I'm experiencing it. Because if the Cambodian interest is at the heart of the issue, then fighting to make it sustainable, working to make aid sustainable for Cambodians would be the core, would be at the heart, and to cut dependency. Because the problem is dependency. So my criticism can be summed up into two words: dependency, which is an ill, and then the widening chasm of inequity between the rich and the poor. And international assistance is enabling the rich to be richer.
Well, let me just address that one point first. The question of, is the aid community actually doing this for the benefit of Cambodians? Do you think that they are or not?
Yes, of course. You know, for example, I think the most benefit, the big benefit that Cambodian can get from the foreign aid is the capacity building. We can see a lot of technical assistance, that transfer of technology from the foreigner to the Cambodians.
But is that having an impact on how the aid is worked, distributed, coordinated?
Development partners are becoming much more responsive to the needs of the country and are attuned much more to the needs of the country. And if you take our institution as an example, the fact that we're moving heavily into areas of agriculture and rural development where the majority of the poor live, those sort of issues is an indication of that. And that's responding really to ground level needs.
Are you seeing this kind of progress in terms of how it's being handled, or do you think it's getting worse?
There is progress, again, but it's the opportunity cost of billions of dollars that have been poured in. If all we can show for billions are roads, and at the same time the dependency are being embedded, then we have to ask whether it's worth it, whether it has been managed well. So this is a problem. And for me, for example, capacity building, it's true, it has increased the capacity of local Cambodians in owning up to and to be more professional, to be managers. But for example, in 1993, we do need 99% of the foreign consultants. Now, I believe that we need no more than 5 to 10%.
You wanted to respond?
In some ways, the most interesting thing that I saw recently was a poll. They carried out a poll of about 2,000, 3,000, admittedly a small sample. 77% of the country believe that the country is moving in the right direction based on the sort of infrastructure that's been built. Not just roads, schools, other construction, etc. Are there concerns in the country? Yes, the poll points that out. But all of this suggests that movement is in the right direction. Not to diminish the seriousness of the challenges, of course.
Perhaps one of the more worrying long-term accusations is the one of dependency culture. Do you think that there is one here already? And how much do you fear that this will become entrenched and determine the future of Cambodia?
Of course, we can survive without the foreign aid. But foreign aid will be a big part, for development fund that we still need at least another 10 to 20 years because Cambodia is still a low-income country. We, of course, in the case that the trench, we have found gas and oil. I think it's a big part of the future revenue that can cover, some development.
Of all the problems that you've mentioned and the worries that you have, what kind of solutions do you think there are? What are the most important things that you think needs to be done to counter the problems that you see?
Well, for international assistance, not to just train on capacity building, but open space for Cambodians to own up and to exercise what they have learned. And I believe there's still a ceiling on what they can do in terms of opportunities, because it sounds right to train, pour all the money to have foreign consultants, whereas a Cambodian person could have done that same job, to do and embed the mentality of dependency instead of opening up the forum and space for Cambodians to actually exercise ownership and what they have learned in terms of capacity.
There we will have to wrap it up. Thank you all very much indeed for being with us today. And that's it for this edition of 101 East. See you again next time.